Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the supply chain and logistics industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. Today, we've brought back Alex Waternickx to join us, and we are also joined by Markus Ly from Westernacher, and we're going to have a discussion about IBP, or Integrated Business Planning, and a new tool from SAP, the cloud data visualization. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being on the show today. How are you?
Fine. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks for the invitation. A very interesting topic to talk about, right?
It is. It is. It's a very interesting topic. I'm looking forward to getting into it, but let's take a quick break from supply chain stuff really quick and get to know each other a little bit better. So my icebreaker question for today, what is your number one tip for combating distractions when working from home? We're all doing some sort of, hybrid, working from home, working remotely, working, if you're lucky, working from some sort of vacation spot. I've seen that as a new trend that's emerging, but keeping focused. What is something that keeps you focused when you're working from home? Markus, you work from home 100%?
Yes. Recently, the last 2 years, basically 100%. Sometimes I travel to the office, but very seldomly. Yeah, but for me, I think two ingredients to stay focused, right? One is a room that you can lock, right, to stay locked in. And the other thing is to have a stash of, because I'm working in Switzerland, I like to have a stash of chocolate where you can grab something from when you need some energy, right? I think these
That's
are the
true.
two secret ingredients.
So is the lock to keep yourself in the room or to keep others out?
Both, I guess.
Alex, do you work much from home?
Yes, indeed. Well, obviously, during the lockdown, it was nearly 100%. In recent times, I think it's going towards 50-50 home office and then also either at the customer on location or within the office. But as from when I started working, I have a very simple recipe. It's I just have a screen in front of me, and it's like as if I'm just a rabbit watching into a light bulb. There can a bomb explode next to me, and I will not have heard it. So working also in major landscape offices has never distracted me. I really have this luxury that I can simply switch off my ears.
Oh, I wish I had that. No, I am easily distracted. And so what I have to do, the days that I do work from home it's the office where I work is open to the rest of the house. So I can't close a door. There's no door. It's just a doorway. And I can't keep my kids out if they happen to be home. I just have to schedule time in to say, okay, this is when I'm taking my break. And once I get there, I can do it. But until then, I need to focus. And the best I can do is just mitigate any other outside things coming in and just say, no, I'm not going to deal with that until I get to my break. Otherwise, I'll be distracted in 12 different places and I'll come back. Oh yeah, I was supposed to get this done.
Yeah. I think you just need to get better organized, right? So I think that's one thing we learned all with the home office stuff, to organize ourselves, especially within the family, much closer. Right?
Exactly. I think a lot of people just houses, at least in the US, recently have not been designed with that in mind. They're very open concept. Rooms are open to one another, and you don't get that closed in feeling that you can have in an office where you can close the door. So I think that is one thing that has made it difficult to work from home, especially here in the US, is where everything is open and you don't have that possibility to close a door. All right, so let's get into our topic today. So we're talking about integrated business planning. Now, I know that these terms have changed over the years. It was sales and operations planning for a while, S&OP. Now IBP has come in and gone out and come back in. And what does the term mean? What does it encompass at this point in time?
Up to you, Alex. I think that's a very good question, right? Because a lot of times when I talk to customers, it's exactly this question, right? Because usually IBP, as you say, integrated business planning is the next step for S&OP, right? To bring S&OP enrich it with the financial view and bringing the financial planning into the whole game. That's usually what we would call as a process IBP, right? But unfortunately, there is another product at SAP which is also called IBP, but actually it serves another purpose, and that's often misunderstood. Right?
Yeah, a point of confusion.
Yes.
Indeed, I was going to say this. When we really take 7 steps back, then I think SAP was really getting onto the floor plan around the 80s. That was it first invented. It really got its peak around the years 2000, and then it came into slumber, whereby a lot of companies had then even a second or a third iteration of S&OP re-implementation. So obviously, as consultants, as also people within the industry, we were looking for other concepts that transgressed beyond what was actually S&OP. In principle, just a tool and a methodology to bring operations and sales together. And then the obvious next partner or stakeholder on the table was then to integrate with finance, to integrate with controlling, etc. So therefore, the term integrated business planning was coined in order to bring budget planning and then this traditional monthly recurring planning together. So the term IBP really came around the years 2000 and was pushed as the next buzz. But then SAP decided to silence the former APO platform and replace it with something that accidentally was also called IBP, however, completely did not cover the same concept. I still do believe that IBP as a name for the product that SAP has put on the market is very well chosen. However, at that particular point in time, it simply, as Markus said, has led to a lot of confusion and also to inflate expectations from all the customers that were initially looking into it. And SAP simply has had a very hard time in shedding off that initial frustration with what the IBP, and then I mean the SAP IBP platform, was offering. But I do think that over time, both the awareness and the acceptance and the understanding of the market has increased a lot. And therefore, definitely, but Markus, you know more about this, the adoption of the IBP platform under the SAP modules has significantly increased.
Exactly. Could not more agree with you, Alex, right? I think that's exactly how it became, right? And still a source of confusion today. Right, and I think SAP has never been very strong in choosing right names that we also can see with other products, right? But at least the product itself, I think, is very good, but the naming was a little bit unlucky.
Okay, so today we're talking about integrated business planning and not necessarily that one piece of software, that one product. So in breaking down these silos and bringing finance into it, is that just the current iteration of the evolution of this planning process, or do we foresee additional silos breaking down and bringing other areas of business into it? Are there any that are still left out, or is this the final frontier, if you will, for integrating all of the business units into this planning process?
Alan, by definition, we are consultants. We will always invent a new buzz. We will always invent a new hype. So you're not going to pin me down on saying that this is now the pinnacle of the evolution that we achieved. Never. But jokes aside. Yes, and we are already seeing the next trend. So once again, I'm taking this same 7 steps back. Initially, S&OP was bringing sales and operations together. Then we wanted to have the third stakeholder around the table, which was then controlling or finance. But now we see that if we only leave it on that level of management, then in some cases it simply becomes a paper-based exercise. Yes, we do have the software behind it, but the decision which is taken does not get communicated and does not get executed. So what we definitely see is now the integration with operations. And this is then, I think over the last few years, the sales and operations execution cycle, or the S&OE, if you want to extend the letter soup towards that. And I do really believe that once we really then go towards the future, that digital twinning and concurrent planning and operations, or concurrent execution with simulation-based optimization, definitely is something that also will find its place within planning systems. But this definitely is still under preparation. There is research going on, and the first prototypes are being implemented. Definitely is not mainstream yet, but that's coming up.
But Ellen, I think you brought a very good point, right? The breaking silo. I think the metaphor works in all the different directions. Well, on the one side, you break the silos within the company to include financial view, right? To include other perspectives, but also we try to break the silos across. That's why I usually like the term more network planning, right? We want to involve more participants in the planning, not only within their own company, with other companies, right? But also, as Alex said, also with other levels of planning within a company, right? Also with execution and the tactical planning and the strategic planning. We want to bring that more together. And at least from my perspective, I think we can see a trend that people understand that they can gain a certain benefit out of connecting to outside the silo, right? To breaking that silo, to say, I don't see my suppliers only as a company who serves me, but we need to work together. I don't see only the shop floor as someone to producing something, but we need to work together, right? And I think that's a general trend, which at least I see in planning, where people realize, I can get a certain benefit out of it if we work together.
So both of you have talked about, going back a few steps and looking back in the history. And so with that in mind, what has changed since COVID in terms of business planning? I mean, obviously COVID has impacted every aspect of the supply chain. Everyone knows about supply chain since COVID. They think they're an expert. So what has changed in business planning that is specifically come from COVID that is impacting the way this trajectory is going now?
I think in Chinese, we usually have a term for a crisis, right? Usually it consists of two characters. One means risk, but the other character means opportunity, right? And I think the COVID crisis made it very transparent that actually there is a certain potential for this. Now it's also a buzzword to be agile, right? People understood, the companies understood, the better I understand my supply chain, the better I can react, the more transparency I have, the better I can react to certain developments. In the past, certain development might have taken years. Now within COVID, it happened within months. And those companies who had this transparency, who had the ability to react to that change more quickly, could adapt, they were also more successful. And I think that brought it just more to the light, right? But condense it and say, oh, look, there is a chance here. And I think since then, also companies realize there is quite a potential here to be taken.
Yeah, you're right, Markus. However, I would want to challenge this traditional view a little bit, because this is like a survivor bias. We hear all the stories of those who have been able to adapt, and we also hear all the stories of those who really completely perished and went under. I think for me the biggest change with COVID is that it was a transition period in which the operational uncertainty simply has become uncertain in itself. And let me try to explain this a little bit. In the past, let's say 2018, 2019, and then all the happy years before that, when we were also young and beautiful. Yes, we were. At that point in time, we were planning for safety stocks. Why? Because we knew roughly what the demand variability was going to be, what the lead time uncertainty was going to be. So we knew and we could dimension and adapt to all of that. With COVID, all of a sudden, this uncertainty that we used to calculate and that we used to anticipate for in itself became a complete unknown factor. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that this is really the key thing that COVID brought to us, that, hey guys, we also need to make sure that we have a good prediction of the risks that we are facing and that we are looking at. And in this sense, Markus, I say, yes, you're completely right by the fact that we either see it as a risk or as an opportunity. But if you want to see for myself what we have learned from this crisis, then I do believe that we need to make a forecast not only about what the future demand is going to be, but also what all the other risks are going to be. And let me give just a very practical example. Nowadays, I ask my clients, are you making a forecast for your lead time? are you monitoring when you will receive your goods? And everyone says, yes, I'm doing this more or less. But formalized a forecast for your future deliveries and your lead time in itself, it's hardly ever that we really see that. And here, I think, Markus, what I've seen that Westernacher is also doing with the data model and the type of projects, this is something where you guys definitely can bring added value.
All right. Go ahead.
Yes, exactly. Again, we didn't want to agree so much, but I here also would agree again, right? That's where I also see this benefit of this added value, right? Because also, with an example, I also come from procurement. I used to work as a buyer, right? And I remember 15 years ago, if you would want to change something, you would take the phone, talk to your supplier and say, okay, I need now, instead of 500 boxes of that, I need maybe 500 or 200 boxes of another thing, right? And then you would ask him by when he could deliver, right? And you usually... last week, I also encountered still a supplier who is using a telefax machine, if you remember that, where you can fax things, right? So usually those kind of alignments would take often a week or 2 weeks to understand, because then after 2 weeks, you come back, yes, I can deliver you, right? Today, nobody is willing to wait that long, right? Also, we as a customer, we are used from Amazon. If I see it online, I want to have it tomorrow or the next day, right? Nobody is willing to say, okay, you can come in the shop in 2 weeks and then you can pick it up. That's why I think also this bringing it together, this is the added benefit we can bring here, right? And I think maybe it's also a little bit too much here then to say, with this big data, with this connecting the data together, people understand there's a added value here, right? Because we always talk about artificial intelligence. We have a lot of data, and people have the data, but we have not learned to connect it to each other, right? And only by the connection, 1 + 1 is more than 2, right? So like coordinates, if you have only one part of the coordinates, it will not help you. By having 2 coordinates together, that's where you can gain the value from, right? And I think especially companies learn more and more that this is really a benefit that they did not see that clearly maybe in the past.
So you've both mentioned the software, the tool itself now. So let's talk a little bit more about that. What is the tool itself? What data is it able to bring in? Markus, you were just talking about making sure that everybody is able to use all the data that they have. What does the tool accomplish for companies?
So IBP, to make it simple, right, enables this network planning. And one thing that from my perspective, SAP did in this sense quite well, they used Excel as a front end for this tool, right? Whatever new tool you use or a planning platform you take, right, in the end, it's a planning platform. Right. But in this, they made a very smart move by using Excel, because in the past, if I look at a lot of companies, also what you mentioned, Alex, with S&OP, right? In finance world, Excel is that planning tool, right? There's no tool beating that, because everybody is used to it. If you try to train people, no need to train, because they know how to use Excel, right? And with SAP IBP, you have the chance to collect all this information together, bring it together into a common planning logic, and gain transparency. Okay, what would that mean if I would delay now my production here by 5 days or 1 week or 2 weeks? What impact does it have on the other side, on the downstream and upstream, right? And I think that's quite a benefit I can see in many companies when they realize that they really appreciate it, right?
Personally, I was extremely skeptical in the beginning when I remember, I think, I got a sneak preview of the beta version of IBP. It must have been 10 years ago, roughly, when they proposed or suggested that it would be Excel-based. And I thought, well, okay, this is extremely childish. I make Excel files just as a prototype, as a quick way to showcase a proof of concept. Is SAP really going to downgrade the APO platform towards some kind of an Excel? So I was extremely skeptical. And I think it also has taken time before companies were actually adapting to the fact that there is this entire machine behind it. It is just a slim client that you see in an Excel front end, but it's what is behind the hood, and it's the entire motor and the engine that still has been the same, even has been significantly upgraded. And for myself, it really has taken me 5 times, and I think 5 projects or so, to be convinced of the fact that indeed it has been an improvement. Markus, what's your impression on how it had been perceived in the beginning on that?
Yes, same like you, right? I started with IBP roughly in 2015, so now 8 years, right, in the beginning. But the nice thing about Excel was, and that was also for us one of the positive aspects when we started implementing that, right? Because planners could identify them very quite well with this user interface, right? Of course, you need to bring in as a lot of logic, but as a user interface, actually, I think it's perfect because people work with that every day. The adoption time is quite quick. If you bring in a new interface like the SAP Fiori app or something else, that takes much longer. But with the Excel, once, as you said, you overcome this understanding. Okay, this is a front end. I see some data in, right? I can work with that data, but behind it there's a complicated machine trying to optimize my supply chain, trying to give me proposals and so on. Once you understand this, I think it's quite a powerful tool.
Yeah. And then also just to respond to you, Alan, I do think that if you compare SAP IBP to any other tools that are currently on the market, because there are many more, I do think that there are 2 reasons why SAP IBP always needs to be taken into consideration whenever a company is looking for something on the market. First is what Markus now is saying. It's the adoption time for the end user. Also, the ease with which scenarios can be generated, because it then simply is just a copy of your front end and you save it quickly somewhere. And this also has been recognized by market research, that the ease with which scenarios can be generated and the speed of decision with all of that is actually unparalleled compared to most of the other tools. And then the second thing is that, well, like it or not, SAP as an ERP platform is still in many companies the basis. And then the integration with what the ERP as a transactional backbone is offering, in the beginning, and then I think it's 2010-ish, the early years, there really was a hiccup, that there was a difficulty. But also there, over time, SAP has made significant improvement, also with, once again, the letter soup, the BPDS, so the production planning and detailed scheduling module, which is now also a part of the ERP transactional backbone, whereas previously that was something on top of it. The way in which all of this is then being integrated is much more sleek, much more efficient. So in summary, what are the added values? I do believe it's the adoption of an Excel-based front end, which may seem childish and simplified, but indeed for the end user really has an added value. Secondly, the scenario planning and the fact that SAP simply can never be ignored whenever there already is an SAP platform.
Well, no, both of you make a great point that when it comes to adoption of any new technology in any circumstance, it doesn't matter if it's, QuickBooks in accounting or, the Windows suite for new users. When it comes to something familiar, something simple, that makes adoption so much easier for the overall rollout of this new product. So I think, especially historically, since a lot of supply chain organizations or departments have used Excel just as their record keeping and doing things in-house, they use Excel to manage their supply chain. So translating over and seeing something familiar, seeing something that they know how to work with, gives them that springboard into, okay, yeah, I'll get into this. And then you can work on the teaching of what else is possible with that engine behind it, that's going to drive the additional value. So what are some of the other differentiators, or are there any other differentiators? I mean, Alex, you just mentioned that obviously the Excel interface is a differentiator compared to other platforms that are available on the market. Is there anything else in the results that it can bring that is a differentiator for this product?
one thing I think that also SAP themselves, they stress too less, right? I think SAP IBP is an abstract platform, planning platform. So you are not, it's not mandatory to have an ERP backbone from SAP behind it, right? Because it's meant to be a separate layer where you can interface data in. So like your example, if some people would have data records in Excel already, theoretically, they could use that as the database and feed it with IBP, right? And then IBP would online calculate the plan, create a production plan, also with this kind of data. Historically, SAP focused a lot of their own products, but I think this is also one big advantage of this SAP. The integration, of course, you need to do it, but at the same time, it offers you some opportunities that you also can connect to other non-SAP systems, right? It's in a lot of marketing slides, but in reality, I have not seen much of those implementations, but theoretically, it could do that. And we are here falling always back to the old patterns, right? Of course, people used to use SAP, they continue using SAP. But people not using SAP might not think about SAP IBP as a potential tool. But in theory, it could also do that, right? And I think that I also did not see with a lot of other planning tools.
Okay, so it's got some adaptability for existing users as well as new users.
And systems, yes.
And other systems, exactly. Other legacy systems that might be in place. So do you have any customer success stories that you can share or any examples of where this has really driven value for a client?
The implementation I started growing with, right? It's a jewelry manufacturer producing stones, right? I worked for Swarovski before, right? And within Swarovski, it was also the past was we created our own applications in SAP, set programming. I think, Alex, you know that, right? A lot of companies, they create their own set box, right? And we would download it, put it into Excel, and some people do manual number crunching. Right. And there was quite some resistance when we introduced that project because people were thinking, but all those special processes that I have, you can never bring that into a planning system, right? But by working with this with the users, I think we came to a point that today people are now used to have this we call it finite planning, right? So you have a plan which is optimized by an optimizer to bring you an optimized plan. They are now relying on that plan, right? So in the past, somehow they were not able, or it took almost 1 week to come up with a production plan. Now they get it overnight, right? And with the capabilities what Alex mentioned, by improving that, we are now targeting to go into a scenario planning that you can do certain scenario within minutes, right? So I think people understand by freeing them up from all this manual efforts, doing bomb explosions manually, doing some number crunching manually. That does not need to be done anymore. They now really can focus on more strategic thing, on really something that a planner can bring value to, right? To understand, do I need to adjust some parameters here? Do I need to move stock here? Well, what would happen here and here? I think by looking at this, people also get more fun or more active in their planning activities, and I think that's nice to watch, right?
I want to come back to something that Markus said before. What is the typical case where SAP IBP could be a potential success? So I will not have a look at what are the effective success stories, but rather where can it be successful? Because it is not for every single company. There are definitely cases where I would not even consider by putting SAP IBP in a recommendation. So what would be then the typical sweet spot? Definitely whenever there already is an SAP ERP backbone. In theory, you could actually be ERP independent. In practice, however, I have never seen it, and I do not even think that there really is the appetite to really venture into such an adventure. So this is one of the first things. Secondly, in the past, there has been this APO platform that has been quite successful on the market. And in the transition towards IBP, there has been turbulence in the market created whereby a lot of other vendors simply jumped on top of it. Not all of them have been that successful. And there is now this second wave of projects whereby there is once again a revision of, hey, were we successful with this non-SAP solution? And there is like, how would I say, some kind of a psychological reminiscence of, hey, this SAP time was not that bad in the end, which should not be underestimated, Alan. And there still is a lot of knowledge within a lot of IT departments about how SAP is thinking. And it's this baseline that still is implemented inherently within the IBP platform. So in short, if you have an ERP backbone and you have already a strong user adoption and an IT knowledge of what the SAP platform can bring you, if those three are combined, then your IBP implementation can be a success. If you divert any way from any of the previous, then it can become difficult, or it would mean that you need an external technical consultant like the guys from Westernacher that they would then have to complement the business side.
So it's not impossible. It just makes adoption a lot more difficult. And so having that sweet spot is where companies can really go into this venture, into this implementation with a lot more confidence that this is going to produce results in the short and medium term. They don't have a long implementation, a long user adoption, a long transition into getting this to a point where it is going to be effective.
Don't get overexcited, Alan.
Oh, okay.
It is never a walk in the park.
Okay, so that's fair. It's never a walk in the park, but we know that implementations of software or new programs are going to have hiccups. There's going to be bumps in the road. It's going to take a while before you're going to see any tangible results from that. But it's those emergencies, or there's the aha moment where something, I didn't think about that. I didn't think how this was going to affect something, or there's a bump in the road and everything gets tabled for a while because you've got to deal with this emergency over here, and things take a lot longer because you have to, get this software to talk to that software, and there's additional programming and custom things that need done. And, that makes it very difficult for companies, especially if they've had that type of experience in the past with a new program or a new adoption that went sideways or that didn't deliver results in the past, that then they're more hesitant to consider something. So what I hear you saying is that when you've got this ERP in the background, when they've got this technical knowledge already in place, it's a lot smoother.
Yeah, Markus, I would be eager to hear your experience on this. How the gradual functionality extension with the SAP IBP platform can be realized.
Yes, especially when IBP came out very early, right? The functionality was quite limited, and I think it was a good way. They and also with IBP we have every 3 months, right? We have a new release that companies they are forced, or it's mandatory to apply those upgrades. That also made them more staying close to the standard, right? Like not in the past, they would hire an army of IT guys in their own company, and they would program a totally different system, right? So I see from that point, people are also waiting for functionalities in the roadmap to come. So they are eager to use the standards, and which is a good thing. Right, so they also try to talk more the same language, and also about 6 months ago I had an interesting talk, because like you, Alex, I would have put the same points for those sweet spots who would adopt IBP. Right, I was talking to a electricity company who is also using IBP for their planning. Right, that was at that time where you had this crisis in Europe, where you had to react quickly because prices going up and down, and they found in IBP, or they were lucky, they thought they were lucky that they had IBP, because they do all this planning with this easy interface, or with doing scenarios and so on. I think I would not have never thought of that, but seems like there is certain creativity there to also adopt those kind of functionality. And I think with the gradual rollout of all these functionalities, I think we will find more and more scenarios where this could also be used, right? But of course, as you said, Alex, SAP is traditionally a more production-focused, discrete industry system where you talk about production and manufacturing and how to organize your resources. I think with IBP, you also have certain possibilities to extend it to other industries, to other ways of working that you probably also could not have done with APO before, right?
Yeah, you're completely right, Markus. When we do then sometimes a planning observation, or we do a shadow run with the planning department on how they're using systems, I can remember in the past when we were doing process documentation for APO, we always had to completely start from scratch because you never knew what you were going to discover. And in many cases, it was do I dare to say this, Alan? It was ugliness what we found. Dead ends in a process, or then clicking on a button that something was uploaded, but no one looked at it anymore. This with IBP is something that I do think has been prevented. So when we now do a process documentation of what the planning department is doing, we can start from the assumption, okay, we roughly know what we are going to discover. Because in the back, one IBP implementation at company 1 is going to be somehow reminiscent of the implementation at company 2. Yes, there will be pepper and salt and spices left and right sprinkled on top of it, and a little bit of pixie dust, but the basic ingredients are there. And this is also something that whenever we come in, we first have a small chat with the guys from Westernacher, because you have this 3 monthly update cycle. But hey guys, can you simply give us back the default documentation, the latest standard? Because we as Miebach, we will not try to keep up to date with this release cycle ourselves. This is why we go back to Westernacher, and then there's simply this exchange of documentation. So we have a basis to start from.
Exactly. So Markus, I love that you brought up that different industries outside of the traditional manufacturing and production are able to make use of this tool. A utility company or an electric company is very far from production. You wouldn't expect that was something they could do, but they do have to produce a service and a product to deliver to their clients. Are there any other industries that are surprisingly adapting to this particular tool greater or in a better way than you thought that they would just off the cuff?
This utility was one of the more surprises I got, right? But in the end, if you think about it, it's very logical, right? It's in the end bringing demand and supply together, right? So, and wherever you have this topic, and planning is nothing else than that, right? Planning is somehow anticipating your future and try to make your best decision based on what you know now, right? And I think with this in mind, we could detach from this traditional approach and say, okay, what are the other scenarios where we can bring in together this demand and supply, where we have to follow certain constraints or have to understand how does my situation look like, right? I think potentially in the coming years there will be probably new fields where we could do that, right? And at the moment, the one I saw most surprisingly was this, but I think I could think of service industry, right? You could also do probably things like this, just how you could connect the data. And that's a nice thing also with IBP. From a technical point, you can bring in whatever you want, right? You just need to map it. You just need to build the interfaces to bring the data together. In the end, as we always break it down on a technical level, it's also always a 0-1. A binary thing, right? Data. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the potential is how to bring that data together to gain some value out of it, right?
Yeah, well, Alan, and you will always have these fringe implementations. But then I would not have looked specifically at SAP IBP. It's just planning in general. It would have been any kind of tool. Any vendor would have been weird, as to say. The coolest things I remember was the distribution of change money amongst banks within Europe. Like how many of these small coins would you need to have at the various cashiers? This in itself apparently tends to coagulate in certain distribution hubs, and then you would need to distribute it once again to the small towns with all the logistics back and forth. Weird. By coincidence, this was done in SAP IBP, but it could have been any other tool. Also here, it was actually the process modeling behind it was much more important. And then another thing that I found a pretty remarkable one, that was the distribution that was done in India of during the religious festivals of a certain type of cookery machines, because on a religious festival there are sometimes multiples of thousands pilgrims that come to a certain spot, all that need to be catered for, and that needs to have also their meals, etc., for which there is a complete separate industry that really makes these huge batches of meal. And the entire planning behind it is also a certain kind of governmental agency that kind of coordinates all of this. Apparently also done in SAP IBP, which I found completely astonishing. However, these are these fringe implementations that it could have been any kind of other planning tool. Also here, I do believe the process behind it is much more important. And in both cases, I really wonder, what is the bill of material looking like? What is the bill of resources? How did the plan it actually? Or is it simply making an inappropriate use of the tool that actually could have been done in an Excel file, but they just want to fancy it up? Your assumptions are mine.
Or they felt that, failure wasn't an option. So they had to go with something that was not going to have any of that, uncertainty about it.
Yeah, that's more the psychological insurance premium that you pay on top of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I think you also mentioned a very good point, Alex, right? So also, I also here, again, I agree with you, right? I think it's always a good understanding of what's the planning problem you want to solve. So meaning you need to understand the process. Only by having that, you can use a right tool in the right way, right? So if you don't know about the process, even a tool like SAP IBP will not help you much. Right. So it's always a combination of both. You need to know what's the process, what's the problem you want to solve, and how to use the tool that you want to use to solve that problem. Right. If one of those two is missing, you could have a very good process, but if you have a very not so interesting tool like Excel, right, then it also does not help you, right? But I think that's the sweet spot between those two things. That's why I think we also cooperate so good with Miebach, right? That we say, okay, on the one side, Alex Miebach provides the process, the understanding, and we on our side, we provide the technical expertise on the tool itself, how to use that.
All right. Any further remarks or any last minute things that we need to discuss or to bring up before we close out today?
Yeah, maybe I think we are in a very, as we also discussed before, right, in a very interesting time now, because as we all see also with migrating all this old APO implementation and everything, we're in a time where you can really make an impact to a lot of this planning logics, planning platforms in the different companies, right? And I also see it in demand here also with our clients, right? I think from a supply chain point of view, it's a very interesting time to be in, because here now you see a lot of innovations, you see a lot of movement. So people are willing to, are more open to accept other approaches, to accept other tools. I think it's a very exciting time for someone being in supply chain, right? Independent of with the Corona crisis or whatever. But if I look at 10 years, 15 years back, I think probably now it's even more exciting time to be here.
I would close with the following, Alan. So we've been talking about planning, and I think we've kicked a few open doors by the fact that you need a process. Yeah, obvious. Everyone knows this. That you need to define out first your industrial footprint, and that planning is only a modulation of all of that, and in some kind of scenarios. I would say kind of boring. This is what you already know for 100 years. There is, however, a very clear trend that is coming up, that planning is moving towards a single process. In the past, it was all split in between short-term planning, mid-term planning, long-term planning, financial planning, marketing planning. This is really getting mingled up into just one sausage. Yeah, I'm a German for something. We have a saying for that. But also that at the same time, this entire planning horizon is just one, and that you can kind of mentally come from the extreme short term towards the long term. In the past, these were different solution databases, and you needed to communicate between these solution databases with all the interfacing problems in between, etc. So that in the end, planning is about taking decisions, and that there is now simply one container in which all these decisions can actually fit in. And this is completely new. This is like a massive revolution, and I think we're just in the beginning, because this implies that this full background automation of planning, so that you actually come to touchless planning, and that the planning will learn from your previous decisions, and that you have some kind of self-learning business optimization towards the target that you have. I really believe that we are at the beginning of this, and this is a breakthrough of which, with the complete letter soup of what is within the SAP portfolio, SAC, IBP, PPDS, whatever you name it, they do have a constellation of some tools with pros and cons, and it's not ideal, but at least SAP really has a movement towards this ideal, and they're moving in this direction. They're not the only one. Other vendors are doing this too. But for us as consultants, there is the SAP strict world, and certainly as a German consulting company within Germany, even more pronounced. There are companies that simply stick to SAP and no questions asked that anything else would ever enter it. By extension, in Europe, worldwide, it's a little bit less pronounced. And if so, then we have Westernacher. For anything else, which would be the non-SAP world, then we as Miebach, we've got other partnerships as well. So in the end, short statement, I do believe that we are on the brink of another revolution within supply chain planning, with all the arguments that I just gave you.
I agree with both of you. It is a very interesting time to be working in supply chain, because the changes are coming so fast, and they are systemic. So a change comes and it affects everything, because we have broken down those silos. We aren't working in those little business pockets anymore. It's all inclusive, and it's exciting to see. And it's exciting to see companies react to it. And it's exciting to see end users and consumers react to it. It's exciting to see the words supply chain in the newspaper, and people are interested in it. Now we're not just the weird nerds in the back room playing with Excel.
Yeah, and also people understand actually planning is about, as you said it, Alex, right, about decision making. It requires some brain, right? And also I think planning is the beginning of all your execution. And I think people also start to realize that whatever you can make up in planning, you don't need to make it up in execution anymore, right? So I think that's also a nice thing that they understand. Oh, actually, the smartest guys in the room usually are the planners, because they start the whole process to tell me what to produce and so on, right? And so I don't need to do all this firefighting and all that stuff anymore.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode today. Thank you guys so much, Markus and Alex, for joining us. This has been a fantastic discussion. We are always looking for new guests on our show to talk about some of the more interesting aspects of supply chain. So if any of our listeners out there have any ideas for additional topics, or if you'd like to be a guest on our show, please reach out to me at podcast@miebach.com. As always, thank you for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. If you've enjoyed the show, hit that subscribe or that like button, give us a rating, and be sure to tune in next time. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
All the best.